Welcome, everyone, to our breakout session on climate adaptation. I am very happy to be here with Jessica Morse and Kaylee Bright. I would like to give them each a brief introduction and let them take it away because they've got a lot of really great information to share with special districts out there. First of all, I'd like to introduce Jessica Morse. She is the Deputy Secretary for Forest Resource Management. And as the Deputy Secretary, Jessica is working to increase the pace and scale of science-based forest management to restore healthy forests, improve watershed health, protect California's unique ecosystems, and make Californians wildfire resilient. Before joining the Newsom administration, Jessica spent nearly 10 years in national security, working for the Defense Department, State Department, and U.S. Agency for International Development. Her assignments included a year and a half in Iraq and tours in India, Myanmar, and U.S. Pacific Command. In 2018, she ran for U.S. Congress in California's 4th Congressional District in the Sierra Nevada region. So for our elected officials out there, Jessica knows your pain. She is a fifth-generation Northern Californian. She and her family still own and manage their own original homestead forest land in the Sierra foothills. She's an avid backpacker, and she's hiked over 500 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. She holds a Master's of Public Affairs from Princeton and a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Principia College. So she has accomplished more in her lifetime than I may ever hope to. I'm so impressed and so happy that we're going to be able to hear from her. Also with us is Kaylee. Kaylee Bright is the Director of the Division for Land Resource Protection at the California Department of Conservation. He leads multiple programs to build regional capacity to lead protection and stewardship of the state's most valuable agricultural and watershed resources through climate change and land use challenges. Prior to this role, Kaylee served as the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Energy, and previously as the Deputy Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the Natural Resources Agency under then Governor Brown. These positions were preceded by a decade of work for the legislature on natural resources, environmental protection, energy, and transportation, as well as other programs for the California State Assembly Budget Committee. We are so fortunate to have both of them with us here today. And starting off the presentation will be Jessica. Jessica, thank you so much.
All of you for your incredible work across the California landscape and your own stewardship of California's natural lands, wildlands, and communities. Today, I'm going to talk to you about our approach to wildfire resilience in the state, give you some of the history, and talk through some of the resources and tools we have available to partner with you on in really achieving long-term fire resilience in California. As many of you have lived through it, we had five of the six largest fires in state history last year burning simultaneously, which stressed our suppression capacity and our communities. That those fires displaced 250,000 people at one time last summer. And just as a point of comparison, we had 4.2 million acres burn in the 2020 fire season. In 2019, we had 277,000 acres burn. The fourth climate assessment in 2018 was released, and it predicted that we would see a 77% increase in annual acres burned in California by 2100. That prediction came true 80 years early. The climate crisis is upon us, and it is colliding with a century-old legacy of forest decisions that have led to multiple crises colliding that are causing this exponential growth in catastrophic fires and cascading climate events that we're seeing. So just a little of the history, which many of you are familiar with, but around the turn of the century and after the gold rush, in California, we had about 97% of our old growth logged. And so we lost that foundation of our forest resilience in the state. The conservation movement came along with Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir and others to really champion this concept of public land and preserving our wildlands in California. However, it was actually a very unpopular decision at the time with the Congress. And so when the Forest Service was established to be the stewards of public land and kind of the front end of the conservation movement, Congress decided to not fund them. And so Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot, who was the inaugural head of the Forest Service at the time, came up with a strategy. They decided to present the Forest Service as a fire suppression entity. Even though they understood the ecological role of fire on California's landscape and on the Western landscapes throughout the US, they said, hey, the Forest Service can put out your fires by 10 a.m. The next day. And so the Forest Service got its funding from Congress, which was really afraid of wildfire at the time. And the concept of public land and the conservation movement survived. But because they traded off the ecology for the politics of the day, a century later, we've had overly dense forests that have had the natural role of fire removed from the ecosystems. It's important to remember that most of California's ecosystems are ecologically adapted for regular fire. Tribes in California for millennia would manage with prescribed fire, and those fires would come through every 5, 10, 15 years, burn out the undergrowth, keep that forest floor resilient and healthy, but it wouldn't take out the larger trees because there was no ladder fuel to get it to the top. So you can see in this picture the difference between an ecologically managed forest versus a forest, which is typical that we have in California now of fire suppression, where you have a lot of undergrowth. The large trees are competing with the smaller trees, and there's a lot of fuel on the landscape. What that means is that that fire burns hotter, faster, it has a larger fuel load, and it gets up into those tree canopies, and it results with a fire that is devastating. I mean, it leaves the entire forest is often gone, and it leads to vegetation type conversion. So a conifer forest can convert to shrublands. Native shrublands could convert to invasive grasses. And but on the other side of the slide, you see what happens with an ecologically managed forest. When you have a lot of those ladder fuels removed and the fuel reduction, then you can come through with prescribed fire or natural fire, and it'll actually play a natural and ecologically beneficial role on the forest, germinating the right plants and producing healthy ecologies out of it. The challenge is that on that legacy of fire suppression, you now have climate change. We had a once in a century drought from 2012 to 2015. I think we're staring down the gun barrel of another one. Actually, a once in a millennia drought. Let's be really clear how out of the norm the 2012 to 2015 drought was. And that caused tree mortality on our overly dense forest. This is a picture around Shaver Lake where the creek fire was, where some areas of it you had 80 to 90% tree mortality. So those warmer summers allowed the bark beetle population to proliferate. The trees didn't have enough moisture to push the beetles out. And so you had this infestation that was climate driven that led to devastation among these forests. This year was one of the first years you then had all of those dead standing trees actually falling over and on the ground. And what's different about a fuel load on the ground from beetle killed trees and tree mortality than normal forest, the normal overly dense forest, is that we build our fire models around a ground fuel load of around a 3-inch diameter wood. The beetle kill pandemic really targeted larger, older trees. And so you end up having diameters of like 30 inches on the forest floor. This caused an unprecedented fire in the creek fire this summer. It caused a phenomenon called standing combustion, where there was a hot center to the fire throughout the entire footprint. So usually a fire burns, it smolders in the middle, and then it has a hot front on the flame, and so you have a hot border, but the perimeter is smoldering. This one, you had active flames throughout the entire footprint of the whole fire, which meant it was giving off a heat load that was unprecedented. It caused the smoke pillar that you see, this pyrocumulonimbus, up to 50,000 feet in the air. And that pillar then collapsed on firefighters multiple times throughout the fire, pushing out, coming down like a splat, and pushing out hurricane force winds in every direction. And this weather system also created its own. This fire created its own weather system. So it had this created fire tornadoes, it created lightning strikes, it created hail. And I was talking to some of the firefighters on the ground, and they said they knew it was going to collapse when started falling from the sky, because this thing had picked up so much debris that it would then pummel it down on people. So this is a very different fire than what we have been used to at the scale that it struck. It is remarkable that there were no fatalities in this fire, thanks to the incredible and heroic work of CAL FIRE, communities mobilizing, and the National Guard crew you can see here, rescuing hikers and communities around people who had fled to Huntington Lake out of the middle of this incredibly dynamic fire situation. So what's terrifying about the creek fire is that it's potentially going to be more of the norm that we see for fires going forward, especially with the low fuel moisture that we are seeing this summer. We can expect more of it. And it's important to recognize that when we talk about sort of the forest health and forest management colliding with climate change here, what you're seeing are cascading climate events. So these fires are coming out of drought, heat triggering the catastrophic lightning fires that we saw, lightning strikes that we saw this summer. And then they cause further consequences. So they cause mudslides and debris flow. They cause homelessness and climate refugees, and they also cause incredible impacts from smoke, from inhalation of wildfire smoke, which has significant health risks for the elderly and youth populations in particular. There is hope. However, we know that when you do forest resilience activities and climate resilience activities, we can actually thrive even in the face of a changing climate. So this is a picture of a forest in Baja California that was never clear cut. It has been managed by lightning strikes and natural fire throughout its lifetime, and it is thriving. It's a Jeffrey pine forest that is thriving at a much hotter climate zone than what we've had historically in California. And so this could potentially be the future of our forested ecosystems in the state, where if we keep them thin, give those trees the resources to thrive, then we can actually retain our forests and healthy forests, even in wildfire areas. So we're really investing across three fronts of fire resilience, and we are thrilled that the governor just signed today a $536 million wildfire and forest resilience package. That is our initial installment. We're anticipating to get more funding in June for these same programs, bringing us up to over $1 billion investment in fire resilience. Just as a point of comparison, last year our investment was $75 million. So this is a huge increase in our resources on these fronts, and they are going to focus on three fronts that are simultaneously fronts of fire resilience that you see here. The innermost layer is really community and home hardening. So those are the investments that you make inside a community in the worst case that a fire comes through. The next layer is what you do around a community. What investments are we making around in that wildland urban interface? So that's looking at ensuring we're having escape routes, that we're putting in strategic fuel breaks to help people survive and thrive, and get out from these fires and arrest them before they come into a community. And the last area is really that whole of landscape scale approach to ensure that we are doing watershed scale strategies to support these, to ensure that we are actually having healthy, resilient watersheds, that we're thinning our forests, that we're thinning our wildlands, so that fire can actually be returned to its normal ecological boundaries and actually play the management role that it's supposed to play in California. So on the resilient landscape area, we're really investing across different land ownership types because California is a patchwork of landowners. You have 57% of California owned by federal land, 40% is private, and 3% is state owned. Of that private funding, 26% is actually 26% of the total, sort of within that 40%, is owned by small family landowners. So you have this patchwork quilt of ownership types, But a wildfire does not stop at a jurisdictional boundary, and so neither does our strategy. So we're really focused across the landscape, excuse me, on investing across ownership. So we have direct funding for state managed lands. We have direct funding for small landowners, which many of you should be aware of. It's called the California Forest Improvement Program, and it gives grants to small family landowners to invest in state lands. We have in their own family land. We have funding that is targeting whole watershed strategies. So we have $155 million in grants for forest health projects to really deliver that whole of watershed approach. Because as we're seeing in the Yuba watershed, for example, the Yuba Water District and the Marin Water District are both really investing in their watershed directly because they are bearing the direct costs of the debris flow into dams, the reduced water storage, from these catastrophic fires. And so investing in healthier, resilient forests actually delivers them better, delivers all of us better investments in water quality and retention capacity. A good example of this is that we're putting in funding directly for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy as well. The Sierra is 60% of our state's water supply, and because those headwaters are so precious, and a quarter of them burned last year, we're focusing a lot of effort on ensuring a faster pace in the Sierra because it could cause that cascading impact of exacerbating drought if we don't start resolving that fire situation. So for those of you who are working on water districts, it's really important to make that connection with your watersheds, and we have resources available to help support that. For those of you who are working in resource conservation districts and in and around communities, for the wildland urban interface, we're putting in a lot of strategic fuel breaks. As you can remember, the governor announced an emergency right when he came into office, his first day, and deployed the National Guard and CAL FIRE to establish an additional 35 emergency fuel breaks that they were to complete within a year. They finished those in time for the June 2020 fire season, and they saved lives. 5 of those were put in around the Creek Fire area that I was showing you the picture of, and that saved lives in the Creek Fire. It allowed people to escape. It arrested the fire along fire lines. You can see homes survived. Some of the homes survived because of it. It was still an incredibly devastating fire, but these tools allowed us to save lives, and we hope to have tools that really allow us to really lower the whole impact of catastrophic fire. So this is a picture of a strategic fuel break. They're often along roadsides. It's thin strips of forest or shrubs that allow firefighters to take a stand, allow communities to evacuate during a fire, and can potentially arrest the fire before it comes into an area. These are pictures of CAL FIRE crews and the National Guard crews out working on fuel breaks in Southern California. And the forest photo is actually a strategic fuel break that had been put in 8 miles long around Paradise area, and it actually self-arrested the campfire. Usually you have staging and firefighters holding lines in them. This one was on the flank of the campfire, and it was such an effective fuel break that it actually stopped the campfire on that flank and saved the town of Sterling City and the Paradise Reservoir, the water supply. The last area is really what we do inside of communities around home hardening. We know that homes burn from the inside out in a wildfire, and so sealing your home and fireproofing it essentially prevents those embers from getting into vents or under your roof. And double pane windows will prevent sort of the heat from a fire from bursting those windows. And so if you can prevent the flames from getting in, a home has a much higher chance of survival. For example, the fire marshal incorporated some of those building standards into California's building code around 2008. And in the Paradise Fire, we saw that homes built after 2008 had a 60% survival rate in the fire, and those built before 2008 had a 10% survival rate. So you're really seeing a big difference in terms of a home standing after a fire. We've also improved our defensible space standards. So now there's a 5-foot non-flammable zone required around a home. So that's removing bushes and shrubs and mulch around your home so that you're not having that direct heat on the home. And so we're investing a lot in what you can see defensible space and home hardening in the state. We have funding for $25 million for the state portion of a $100 million federal partnership for a pilot program to help low-income homeowners harden their homes. We're increasing our defensible space program, and we're also expanding the University of California Fire Advisors program, where they really do this outreach to ensure that that there's science and education behind this. They also have the Master Gardeners program, and the Master Gardeners are now working on firescaping. So how to get fireproof landscaping into California communities, a similar model to what we did with drought. So that really gives you a sense of the 3 layers of fire resilience that we're investing in. We're putting $1 billion potentially into this $500 million we have in hand as of today, and we'll be seeing that roll out this summer at a really increased pace and scale of fire resilience across the state. However, we recognize that every community is going to need a different ratio of these 3 layers of what they do inside a community, around a community, and across the landscape. The approach you take and the ratio of those 3 intervention layers that you do in coastal sageland versus high Sierra versus Southern California chaparral are different. And so we want to make sure that we are putting communities in the driver's seat and regions in the driver's seat of their own strategies, but giving them the tools to ensure that these strategies are effective. So a lot of our funds are put out through grant programs and available for communities, but to ensure that they're having a cumulative impact and really truly delivering fire resilience, that we are really funding the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program through the Department of Conservation. And this program is really foundational because it allows communities to build regional collaboratives. It allows them to then to design fire resilient strategies, incorporating different stakeholders into the program and rolling it out. So I'm going to turn it off over to my colleague Kaylee Bright, who is running this incredible program, which we are scaling up and will be a foundation for all of you to engage directly with us on fire resilience activities in your region.
Thank you very much, Jessica. So maybe I will kind of kick it off, stepping back a little bit. From Jessica's presentation, we know that fires impact all communities in all regions, have distinct needs when it comes to preparing for fire resilience. Through my work in other policy areas, this is really no different than other infrastructure programs where it is drastically different from, as far as life and safety and public health. But aside from that, thinking about this program area shouldn't be much different from other infrastructure policy areas where when you identify statewide needs that have regional variances, you really empower the regions to come to the state in full partnership to not only do the projects to meet those needs, like let's say for transportation, but also to engage in the community outreach, fund the planning, the project development, support the architects, the engineers, all of those steps that get you from needs identification to project deployment in a community for a region. So with the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program that we manage at the Department of Conservation, it really is that paradigm shift for forest and fire resilience work, which in the past was really governed by competitive grant programs and thinking about who across the state can compete for funding. It wasn't governed by how can we allocate resources in the most equitable way to equitably respond to the needs of the state. So through the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Programs, what we are doing in essence, and I'm gonna bring a map up in a minute, is trying to push funding into the regions to stand up regional and sub-regional collaboratives and organizations so that they can essentially engage with the public, engage with the stakeholders, and bring to the state and bring to the federal government policies, priority plans, and shovel-ready projects that can deliver tangible and real protections for our ecosystems and our communities. Right now, in forest and fire resilience work, we are in a time of incredible collaboration across all of our state, federal, and local governments. We have intense interest from the public. We have fantastic partnership from our nonprofit partners, and we have fantastic partnership from special districts like the resource conservation districts, water districts, et cetera. And what this program is really meant to do is set up that scaffolding for all of those different partners, and it can be incredibly complex. We're really relying on the region and then setting up that scaffolding for all of those partners to come together, identify priorities, and then really push a region in a direction towards fire resilience by not just putting on paper what is most important to them and their interests, but funding directly those activities that are needed to get those projects from idea to shovel ready. So I think the map might be up or it's coming up. So there it is. So with our program, so what we essentially did was we broke the state into 4 main regions. Within each region, we have funding going to specific block grants, which the block grants are true to name, which is the state is moving funding to a regional or sub-regional level. So within each of these regions, we may have multiple block grants. For instance, the Sierra Nevada region is primarily the Sierra Nevada Conservancy serving as our funding coordinator. The North Coast region, the North Coast Resource Partnership, is our large block grant. But in areas like the Sacramento Valley, we're in discussions right now with collaborations of resource conservation districts to see how they can kind of form collaborations that we can then fund for them to work together on a scale that's bigger than their individual organization. What this program does, in essence, it gives the regions a super efficient mechanism to move state funds to the regional level so that they can deploy those resources out into the field and get work done. One of the principles of the program is efficient, flexible granting processes, and we really strive to build large collaborations in large regions so that our granting process can be as scaled down as possible so that we can reach as many people as possible through a single grant. In the governor's budget that was proposed, actually in the funding package that was recently approved in the legislature, our program will be receiving $50 million of new funding for continued work on this program. We have additional funds in the governor's budget for money out from there. What I think all of that will translate into is that we actually have a super healthy pot of funding to build that pipeline of work to make our communities more fire resilient. And what we want to do with that funding is really kind of like fuel those, not say fuel, that's a bad pun, but we want to kind of push funding into all of the layers. So I think what my ask for you all that are watching this presentation. So we're trying our best to build collaborations that are as inclusive as possible, but we really want to kind of ask you to think about how you might fit into your local collaborations, and if you have any questions about how you should participate. It is a sprawling program that's different in each part of the state, so it's hard to really give that description now. I really offer the opportunity to reach out to me directly. I think I can get my information to you through the association. Otherwise, look me up at the Department of Conservation. Otherwise, just I think from there. I look forward to your participation in our program, and we will, over the next year, 2 years, be really showing you where we're making progress and how we're meeting the needs of these different parts of the state. So I will leave it to that and bring it back to Jessica.
Thank you so much. I hope that you're all really hearing what a huge opportunity that is for engagement, because that program, the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, is really grounding most of our efforts across the state at the regional level, because we have resources for landscape scale resilience, for activities in the wildland urban interface, and at the community level. As you heard, we have 155 million in grants alone for forest health through CAL FIRE, grants that'll be coming out through conservancies for similar landscape scale projects. At the wildland urban interface level, we have $123 million in grants for fire prevention activities. So, and then $100 million for home hardening and defensible space, in addition to other activities. So I hope that you're hearing that there's a lot of dollars available, but we want those dollars grounded in regional strategies, collaboratively driven, that actually meet the needs at that level. And the goal of the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program is to give those resource conservation districts and communities tools to be able to succeed. We don't just want our grants to be going to the communities that have the highest capacity to write grants. We want them to go to the communities and the areas that have the largest strategic need for fire resilience, which is most of the state, but to really invest those in a way that is strategic, impactful, and lasting.
Yeah, and I might also add that, you know, I've worked in this field for quite a few years, and I've never seen the multiple partners at the state and federal side working as closely as they are together towards the same goals with the same consensus around projects. And I think what the value that the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program brings to that type of working relationship is that through this program, we will be able to develop kind of efficient ways to access long-term funding sources for a region or community's priorities. And that's a big deal, because in state government, you know, the way we silo up and the way that we kind of stratify our grant programs, that alignment doesn't happen all that often. So we're super excited to be part of this larger proposal. We think we can really play that valuable role of connecting groups and aligning, but also really elevating what a region's needs are, and then elevating the partners in those regions that can actually do the work to get people protected. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition too, because really when we're making this $1 billion investment, we want to also make sure that we're leveraging federal dollars to invest into those same strategies, and can be advocates for communities to get federal resources as well. And we want to make sure that it's having a lasting impact. And so part of the paradigm shift that you're seeing in the forest sector isn't just scaling up our capacity to get things done, but it's also ensuring that we're thoughtfully addressing some of the foundational issues that have been hindering our pace and hindering our capacity to be as impactful as we would like to be. And so this regionally focused approach is really shifting one of those paradigms, because it really allows us to target dollars into a region, which not only gives you a better cumulative impact in terms of fire resilience, it also then helps focus the resources so that they are delivering predictability, that you can then you can build on that to start up businesses and to create good, steady jobs in those communities, so that you can actually have what some people call kind of the triple bottom line impact of strengthening a community, strengthening the economy, and strengthening an ecology together. So the foundation for all of these new wildfire investments are going to be a regionally driven strategy, ensuring that we are integrating science-based management into every aspect of it, improving and increasing our workforce by training a larger workforce, so that we're not held up by by trying to compete for contractors who are available on the ground, expanding opportunities for business development, kind of filling that void that rural banks used to fill, and improving our regulatory efficiency and oversight. And by the way, this photo that I'm sharing behind you is actually the lake, the reservoir around Paradise, that was saved by a strategic fuel break during the fire. So one of the big hurdles that we have in the fire sector is what to do with the woody biomass coming off. So we're doing a lot of thinning. We're taking down small trees, undergrowth. Sometimes it's chipped, but there is a lot of dead trees. There's a lot of woody biomass coming off that does not have traditional markets. And so you can see there's a picture of me just as for perspective. That's a slash pile up around Lake Tahoe. And the Forest Service had estimated that there's about 400,000 slash piles like this around the Tahoe Basin alone. So the woody biomass challenge in California is significant, and we're working to tackle it head on. So we are investing in alternative means so that you're not just open pile burning it in the winter. I mean, it's better than a wildfire open pile burning it, but we'd rather find destinations for that woody material that allows us to capture that carbon. And so there's some really innovative tools, things you can do with it. You can take small diameter wood and turn it into wood beams like you see in this photo. It's called mass timber, and it can actually replace steel and concrete in skyscrapers. I've heard somebody reference them as fly scrapers. And California building codes just changed last June to allow now up to 18 stories to be built out of these wood laminate beams. And so mass timber building can be a really new and exciting industry. And some of our resources are going to GoBiz at the governor's office to help attract larger investors and businesses in these technologies. There's also a lot of innovation about turning those woody biomass piles into jet fuel or some type of diesel replacement. There's also ways to turn it into electricity and actually capture the carbon and store it. So you're creating a carbon negative cycle. So there's technology that is on the ground now, and there's technology that is coming online that is practiced in other parts of the world and often up in Canada or Oregon. And so we're trying to bring those technologies to California and create an environment that will allow us to invest in these areas. There's also a lot of need for more traditional wood products because a lot of what comes off the forest is larger, potentially merchantable wood, especially post-fire. When you are losing redwoods and Douglas fir, there's a market for them, but right now, because our mills are at capacity, you're seeing redwood and Douglas fir getting chipped and driven to landfills in Nevada. So that is not the carbon cycle we would like to have happen. We'd rather find a destination for that wood and have it get sequestered, that carbon get sequestered in some type of construction or use for merchantable wood. And so what you see here is a micro mill. There's just a need for more equipment on the landscape to actually be able to process wood at the pace that it's coming out of the forest. And there's enough of it that it still is sort of an ecological demand for it. So what we've invested in is there's $16 million in this budget for the iBank to launch the Climate Catalyst Fund. These are low interest loans that will go to start small businesses in either traditional wood markets or wood innovation sectors that reduce the risk. But what we found is that commercial banks will not fund small businesses in the forest sector. Rural banks used to do that, and those are few and far between these days. So it's very difficult if you want to start a business as somebody with a masticator or a micro mill or a small logging operation that you can't in California because you can't get the loan. If you have a great idea of how to turn chaparral into lotion, which somebody's doing up in Tahoe, it's hard to get a loan to start some of these innovative businesses. And so the Climate Catalyst Fund is designed to give low interest loans. It'll be a revolving loan fund to get businesses launching in the sector so that we don't have the equipment shortages. We're also significantly expanding the workforce in this area. So you see the California Conservation Corps Forestry Corps is going to be expanding, as well as typical programs like the CHIPS program, which has been throughout the Sierra. This is a program where counties are partnering with tribes and training tribal members on prescribed fire and fuel reduction, and then incorporating traditional ecological knowledge from the tribe into fuel management practices. And they are becoming fuels crews throughout the Sierra right now. There's one tribe, the Hungalalti tribe up in Alpine County, has seen a 30% reduction in unemployment for that tribe alone from this single program. So investments in workforce development are really crucial to ensure that not only we have the crews available to do this work and do it well, but that these are actually paying off dividends for the local communities that are living in high fire risk areas. This will also be funding, it's going to be a $28 million grant program, and $6 million of which is in this early action funding, and the rest is being requested by the governor for the June budget. And they will also be grants to community colleges. And so as your community has ideas for workforce development programs in this sector, we would encourage you to apply and get people to work in your community doing long-term fire resilience. So that is the main overview here, and I am excited to be working with you all, and excited to take questions and talk a little bit more about our work on wildfire resilience.
Thank you so much, Jessica. The presentation from you and Keali'i was educational and inspiring, and I think our members will find it very interesting, both those that are directly involved right now, those that want to get directly involved, and certainly all of us, I think, are indirectly affected and very interested in what's going on in our forests right now. With that said, I do have some questions for you that I'd love to run by you and see if we can drill down into a few other things that I know I've been hearing from our membership, from our special districts. It may come as no surprise to you that special districts are sometimes overlooked and maybe an afterthought when it comes to certain statewide budgeting and funding. And I don't think that's an intentionality. I think sometimes it tends to happen because, unlike, for example, our county counterparts in local government, we don't often directly implement state programs that are state funded. It's oftentimes local programs that are local funded. But as you mentioned, when it comes to these statewide issues that now we're realizing how interconnected we all are, it's so important to partner. And so when it comes to climate adaptation, obviously special districts are at the forefront. How can they make sure that their voice is heard on this topic? Where should they be connecting and getting involved? I know Keali'i alluded to this, but just wondering if maybe you could put a fine-tooth point on that, or an exclamation point, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. That resource, that the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program is designed specifically to give special districts and local entities, because so often it's hard to navigate the state budget. It's like we've got grants for workforce development and business loans, and grants for fire prevention, and grants for fuel reduction, and grants for forest health, and it is hard to navigate, sending out 20 different grant applications and not knowing if you're going to get any of it. And so rather than making all of you try to reinvent the wheel and figure this out on your own, the goal of the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program is to bring you in so that you can have a seat at the table, a voice at the table, are part of the planning process, that you are central, and that they then help you find the grant dollars to then execute that program. And we're trying to align it now. The next phase of this is going to actually be really creating kind of a fast track for the grant dollars into those regionally developed strategies. So that I think it also helps for regions to make sure that all of the players are at the table, so that a water district is working with the resource conservation district on actually the entire strategy for their watershed, so that those aren't disconnected. And so bringing everybody to the table with CAL FIRE and CAL FIRE's unit fire plans is really a crucial way of success, because while we're doing spatial and data analytics to identify where the highest fire risk areas are, and where the biodiversity risks are, and where it's most likely to have a mudslide after a fire, and there's only so much that knowledge only goes so far. It's a helpful tool, but it should be the foundation of a planning tool for bringing in that local knowledge and insight as to where tools are needed. When we're identifying fire risk for fuel breaks, we're taking into account demographics, such as where you have low rates of car ownership, so people couldn't escape, where you have high rates of disabilities, where people would have a hard time evacuating a fire, and focusing and targeting areas there where that people won't escape a fire quickly or easily. But those special districts are going to know much more readily who's going to be at higher risk in a fire than any mapping or data analytics can tell us. And it's going to be the same with understanding the nuances of their water flow, of their, just of every aspect of the special district. And so I think bringing in that local knowledge and insight as a leader and a partner at the table. I mean, the state is here to empower you, and we are leaning on your expertise to be effective, and we are going to give you the tools and resources to succeed, because we're all in this together. These fires are not stopping at ownership boundaries, and the fire does not recognize where a special district starts and ends and where it's federal lands, and so because the fire doesn't, we can't. And so we need to have these holistic strategies, and I hope that you're seeing these resources available, and that by aligning some programs, the programs will often feel familiar for you, but by aligning them in a way that is putting locals in charge, we're hoping to see a much stronger cumulative impact of these dollars.
Well, Jessica, I know that we're recording this, but I feel like I can see the virtual heads in the audience nodding and the hearts singing as you're saying all of this. And so I think you're going to have a lot of really excited local officials as they learn more about this and engage. I do have another few questions for you. I'm going to keep throwing them at you until you tell me to stop.
That's great.
Special districts are very diverse, right? They're as diverse as the state and the communities that we serve, but many of them, whether fire protection, resource conservation, water utility, even rec and park districts that are directly involved or affected by wildfire, are going to be really, really concerned and interested in what we're doing here, and particularly how they can potentially draw down some of those funding dollars directly. I think you just gave them kind of a clear understanding of the framework of how it would look. And certainly throughout your presentation, you did a great job discussing the connections with each of those different types of districts. But I'm wondering if, because I know this is going to be probably the number one question people watching this breakout session are going to have, is, are there just a few maybe top of mind highlights that you might be willing to share in your mind in terms of specific types of direct funding opportunities that any particular type of district might be able to apply for under the types of funding that's already been approved or that is currently proposed?
Sure. I mean, so everyone can directly apply for all of these grant programs. And so you can apply for forest health grants through CAL FIRE. You can apply for fire prevention grants through CAL FIRE. Workforce development grants will be available through CAL FIRE. And then multiple conservancies are going to get resources too. So kind of check your region. All of the high fire risk conservancies will have dollars for activities. So Sierra Nevada Conservancy is going to be pushing out grants, Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, the Coastal Conservancy. So the state conservancies will also be a good funding source to go to. But again, I just want to really reemphasize so that these districts don't have to navigate the complex state grant process by themselves, that joining up, I think your first stop should be finding your local regional and forest and fire capacity program, and figuring out who the hub is. And it'll be they have certain regions, but for example, I think there's like 8 collaboratives in the Sierra Nevada region, for example. And part of the we proposed funding directly for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, in part because they had regional collaboratives like the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative already really, really well designed with packets of shovel-ready projects ready to go. And so we just are funding that whole pipeline just to get it out and going. And so that's more of the model we'd like to go towards, where our grant dollars are essentially the program funds on the ground but the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program gives you tools to plan in a collaborative way. And so you can still apply for one-off grants as to your heart's content. And there's going to be a lot of resources on the table for that. However, more strategically, in addition to doing that grant application as every special district can, that signing up for the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, having a seat at that table, helping them do that design, that is how that program is probably going to get a lot of the projects identified by that process for those regional designs are going to, which will be done by resource conservation districts, water districts, right, special fire districts, unit fire plans will be part of that. Those are going to get direct, those are not direct funding, but those will get sort of a streamlined path for the grant dollars. So that's probably going to be the most efficient path to go down. But yeah, I mean, if you already have projects that are ready to go, then just put in a grant application and then another direct way to get dollars. I think really reaching out to local business centers and local community colleges, highlighting some of the tools we have for jumpstarting small businesses and workforce development is going to be a really crucial tool for paying off dividends in this sector.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take the question a little bit outside the box here, throw you a curveball. I'm guessing you'll probably knock it out of the park. But for the first time that we at CSDA are aware of, these recent wildfires completely wiped out the entire service territory of a special district. To my knowledge, that had never happened before. The examples being the Big Creek Community Services District with the Creek Fire, the Paradise Irrigation District, and Paradise Recreation and Park District with the Camp Fire. This, as you can imagine, and maybe are particularly familiar with, has presented some unprecedented challenges, but also opportunities for our members. One of those challenges is, how does a special district serve a rebuilding community when its entire enterprise revenue structures, such as water sales, go to zero for a period of years, or it's non-enterprise revenue, such as property tax, right? Because there's no more building standing on the ground, go to zero. So that's the challenge that I wanted to throw out. The opportunity is, we've had, for instance, Recreation Park District, Paradise, has said, hey, we want to redesign our park system in such a way that it is one of the primary natural fuel breaks around a rebuilt Paradise. And they found that during that particular fire, they had some of that happen sort of accidentally, right? They had populations sheltering in place in makeshift forts in the middle of their parks, and they saw those arresting of fire moving through because of their parks. So now they're thinking, well, how do we intentionally design it to do just that? And so, given the sort of new worlds that we're living in, maybe what do you see as some of those, or how would you perhaps respond to, if you care to that type of unprecedented challenge and opportunity that we're experiencing, and maybe how that fits into this puzzle that you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I mean, the scale of these fires is just unprecedented, and that means there's no model. So it is both devastating and an opportunity for really innovative, creative thinking. And as we, as an entire state, are really looking at climate resilience beyond just wildfire, right? I think when we're looking at the impacts of heat, sea level rise, drought, that in addition to the catastrophic fire, these are all interrelated, and a lot of our strategies for surviving them and thriving. It's really about how do you adapt, especially after you've lost something in total. And so how do you adapt in a way that is going to be more resilient coming forward? I think a big question for us is, how do we live in these catastrophic fire areas? Because road widths that before were considered okay, in these hotter fires, it's not okay anymore. And so you have communities kind of at the end. I used to live in Pollock Pines, and it's a high fire danger zone, and it is a community that is built on the old Oregon Trail, and And so, I mean, it's built on this old, sort of covered wagon era, not the actual Oregon Trail, just let me be clear. That it's built on sort of old covered wagon era design on the trail that is the road in and out of these sort of what are suburbs in the woods. And so as a result, you'd have thousands of people evacuating onto one very narrow road that doesn't have access points, and so it is challenging, right? It creates a major risk, and that's where you're seeing a lot of lives impacted. And so I think it's a question of like how we create tools so that we can build in a way and live in a way that is fire resilient. And so, I mean, for example, like a model I like to look towards in terms of creative thinking is like the Truckee rail yard, right? Truckee's a high fire risk area, and um, private developer came in there and took the old rail yard, so an old industrial site, and that has no trees around it and is very sort of flat and fire resilient. And they built 200 condos in there and kind of mixed use housing, storefront underneath, walkable to the little downtown. And here you are in a rural fire risk area that they're building kind of a housing model that would look a little more urban historically. And yet that's fire resilient housing in rather than putting a bunch of houses on top of a ridgeline. I mean, 200 houses on top of a ridgeline is very different than 200 houses that are built in a way that's more strategic. So, I mean, this is just kind of giving you some sense of like how there's a lot of room right now for out of the box thinking and innovative thinking. And there's a lot of resources for innovation here. And so I think there's challenges with communities coming back, right? I was on the ground for Paradise for a month after the fire, helping with the recovery, and I saw devastation and trauma from people that I hadn't seen since I was in Iraq. And just people are in places where they're fleeing from their lives. You have people who are marginally homeless, right, living in motels or couch surfing, that then don't get services such as FEMA dollars to recover. It's harder to access those. And so communities end up taking on sort of that challenge as well. So I think that the challenge of how do you rebuild when you've lost everything, how do we innovate, it's really about sort of asking what's going to be the model that's going to work for the next 100 years. So often, as you know, when you're working with local communities, it's there's a lot of pressure to bring in revenue or solve for the problem that's in this election cycle. And it's really important to sort of not make that mistake. That's why I told the story about Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot at the beginning, where they adapted the ecology to the politics of the day, and 100 years later, we're paying the price. And so we need to be able to have a long enough horizon that we are not only delivering safety results for today, but that we're actually building resilience out for the next 50, 100 years, so that we are creating an ecology and a community that lives in that ecology that can actually survive the changes our planet's undergoing.
I love that you started with that history, that short history, by the way. That really helped frame the issue in a way that, honestly, as many of these types of presentations that I've heard, I felt like it really set it up better than I've heard before in a way that was just helpful in me understanding it. So thank you for that. And thank you for that answer. I have kind of a quick clarifying question because, you know, we're thankful and we're appreciative. I mean, I think all of California is very fortunate that right now we are in a year of abundance, surprisingly, a year of abundance when it comes to revenues rather than a year of deficit. And so, the state has been able to make investments and is planning on making more investments. But there's a lot of money being talked about in the newspapers and press releases and legislation. It's just hard to keep track of it, I think, for a lot of the local government folks. I'm sure it's hard to keep track of it for people in the administration and the legislature. When you talked about the $536 million in context of the $1 billion investment that we saw in the governor's January budget proposal, how are those related? And are there any other pots of money that we should be aware of and how those connect to each other?
Sure. No, you're asking the right person. The budget is entirely in my head. So that is what I eat, sleep, and breathe, is building and executing this budget. So so yes, we put together a strategy for $1 billion in wildfire resilience. So that is separate from fire suppression costs, right? That's separate from like the helicopters and the firefighters on the ground. So I just want to make that clear. And so that is an increase over $75 million last year and $200 million from the previous years under the greenhouse gas fund. So this is a big paradigm shift in both the scale of funding and also the types of activities. So new things in this budget are things like is really scaling up so that it's statewide and grounding a lot of our resources around the regional forest and fire capacity program, direct resilience funding for state land managers to actually ensure that our state land is delivering real fire resilience. That there's direct funding in there for small forested landowners. So anyway, there's a lot of new activities in this funding package. All of the work around really trying to jumpstart economic growth from this activity that we're putting on the landscape, ensuring that it's not just a flash in the pan, but is actually that this $1 billion investment continues to reverberate through communities and that communities are getting jobs created for it is really crucial. So of that billion, the governor had initially proposed $323 million for early action, which was funding that we had wanted before the budget cycle. Because remember, the wildfire crisis is not going to wait for our budget cycles. And so wildfire crisis typically starts in the summer, and that's when we get our budget, and we can't wait. And so we asked the legislature to try to give us funding early, and they delivered, right? So we now have funding a couple months ahead of the typical budget, and so that gives us a head start on fire season. We are incredibly sober that none of these activities get done overnight, and that whether you're building a fuel break or putting on home hardening, that these take a while. So with the original funding for early action, we had proposed the legislature bump that up to $536 million for this early head start on the $1 billion. And so we're going to see some of those activities go on the ground immediately with surging National Guard crews, Conservation Corps crews, CAL FIRE hand crews. So you'll probably start seeing them just out in your community really tackling fuel reduction work straight up, CAL FIRE unit projects. Those will get, projects that are underway are going to get finished faster and larger. So you'll be able to finish not just phase one of a project, but phase 2, 3, and 4. And then there's other things that is going to give us a head start so that, we had already put out a solicitation for grants before we had the dollars in hand, which is highly unusual for the state. And so you'll probably see those grants getting awarded and out on the ground, by late May, early June, which is again before we would even typically get our budget. So we'll probably start really seeing sort of cumulative impact. This was designed to buy us an extra fire season, right? A lot of these projects take a year. And so if you had started in July or August with them, they wouldn't be done until they'd get stalled out in the next fire season 2022, and that you wouldn't see the results until fire season 2023. This allows us to see some immediate results for this fire season, but to then also have it buys us a fire season. Essentially, that extra couple months head start is really crucial. Because as many of you guys know on the ground, often the window to do this work is your late fall, whenever you get your first rain, right? It used to be Thanksgiving, sometimes it's January. And so whenever you get your first rain till whenever that rain window really stops, when it starts getting really dry. What is sobering about this fire season that we need to keep in mind is that we are seeing one of the driest years on record, right? That the fuel moisture is what we track in terms of telling us when things are really at high fire risk. So how much they've dried out. We're seeing fuel moisture right now at levels that are typical for August. And so it has been such a dry year that it is putting in parts of the state just really, really low fuel moisture levels. I mean, we had a red flag warning in January this year. I mean, let's just be really clear with everybody that this fire season is going to be tough. It's going to be hard. we are putting huge efforts into fire suppression, right? We're increasing helicopter crews and air tankers and firefighters. Those are getting out on the ground immediately as well. And we're doing this fire resilience work. And our progress this year on it is going to really depend on when that hot starts, because there's a certain point at which it'll be too hot and dry to have a chainsaw on the landscape. It'll be too hot and dry to have your masticator out there, and so that's when the fire resilience work tends to pause. And again, when fire season's over, so we're in for a tough haul. Hopefully, we won't have the lightning complex. Right, the lightning strikes were really unprecedented because you had 14,000 lightning strikes in a 72-hour period, which started 11,000 fires simultaneously. Right, we had seen a lightning complex like the lightning siege like that around 2008. So it had been a decade since we'd seen anything even remotely comparable to that dry lightning. And so, fingers crossed we won't have that scenario again. But climate change is upon us, and it is changing the dynamics. And there is no normal anymore. And so, the more nimble and adaptive we can be, the better.
Thank you. Sobering. You mentioned
Yeah,
certainly.
I didn't mean to say, hey, we're putting a lot of money in fire resilience, which is really great news, and then to depress everyone. So my apologies. There are lots of resources for us to make real progress, have hope.
I love it. I love it. So I do have a question in terms of, I know you're the wildfire expert, but you did reference sea level rise. You certainly referenced the impending drought that we all know, we're staring down the barrel of, I think is what you said. We've got, in terms of sea level rise, we've got sanitation districts that may need to be relocating their sanitation facilities. And maybe this is maybe a slower moving or seemingly slower moving challenge that we're facing. We've certainly got port and harbor districts, with facilities that could be jeopardized, right? Water districts in terms of saltwater intrusion, those sorts of things. And then again, our recreation and park districts when it comes to things like cooling centers or evacuation centers. Is there anything that you're able to share, outside of the wildfire realm, just from your exposure working in the administration with your colleagues and the interconnected aspects of what you do, that our members that are impacted by those sorts of climate situations can learn from as they go to doing climate adaptation?
Yeah, absolutely. I will not pretend to be the expert on sea level rise or any other adaptation tools, other than to highlight that wildfire is sort of the first out the door, right? Just the scale of the crisis we're seeing is likely to be then comparable and echoed in other crises down the line. So where it's just unprecedented, unpredictable, and requires very nimble and fast action. So the administration is entirely focused on adaptation and resilience, and there's a lot of efforts that are happening across the board. As many of you will recall, there's a lot happening behind the scenes, but publicly you'll remember that we had proposed in the 2020 budget, which got I describe it as getting eaten by COVID. The 2020 budget proposal included a governor-led climate resilience bond, and so a lot of our ideas around climate adaptation and tools for sea level rise, like that's a really good thing to just go back and look at to see kind of how we had been thinking about climate adaptation. But there's lots of resources for working on extreme heat, urban greening activities, sea level rise. I mean, these are all real challenges that have I have counterparts that are working full time on them and are real experts. And so, but yes, I mean, they all interact. I mean, I think an interesting example would be cooling centers. So that a lot of the adaptations we're doing can have multiple benefits. So for cooling centers, for example, are also safe havens for smoke or clean air centers during a catastrophic fire, and protecting people from that PM 2.5, that wildfire smoke is really crucial. And the science is a little bit new, but there are lots of studies that are pointing to higher incidences in chronic asthma among youth after being exposed to prolonged fire smoke, that there are higher incidences of stroke and heart attack among seniors after being exposed to wildfire smoke. British Columbia was orienting some of their COVID strategies around sort of consciousness of wildfire smoke because of some studies that had come out of Montana where they saw spikes in influenza after a community had been exposed to wildfire smoke because it was lowering immune capacities and so immune systems. And so, so there's a lot of really serious health impacts from fire smoke. And so those cooling centers that were originally designed to give people a safe haven during extreme heat events are also places that you can go during a catastrophic fire event to be able to get clean air. And if you design them right, they can potentially be those survivable spaces where communities can go to evacuate and hide out from a fire. I mean, we saw like in Paradise, it was particularly terrifying to have the Feather River Hospital melt, essentially. I mean, they were evacuating the fire as it was coming in. The back half of the building was melting while people were still trying to get out. They couldn't evacuate on the roads. And you just had fire trucks there hosing it down and keeping some wards surviving so that people could survive that area. And so thinking about how we're designing community spaces that can be fire survivable, where they're not going to start collapsing and melt and get people trapped during a fire in case the roads there's no way to evacuate, is really crucial. But a lot of those places can be the same location, that these climate resilience centers are really crucial.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I'm going to try to drill down for just a second on that, just kind of off the cuff here, because what you said really resonated with me. Is I've had a lot of conversations with recreation and park districts in particular, but also our veterans memorial districts who, in some very rural parts of the state, there'll be a veterans memorial district that has a very small budget, and they have a veterans hall that in this particular community, and maybe for miles and miles, is essentially the only public building of any size. Right now, that Veterans Hall was not built to be a cooling center or even evacuation center for that standpoint, but when it hits the fan, it's the de facto place that people are going to go. Right. So when it comes to some of these conversations, I think that our members who might be involved with managing or running or governing a facility like that, they hear a lot of these words get thrown out in the newspapers, or CSDA sends out an e-news article, oh yeah, there's money for cooling centers or something. And that's not maybe resonating, right? Because that's not how they've looked at that service in the past. What advice would you have for them to, I guess, educate themselves on those opportunities and what that can mean for them as they're doing upgrades, maintenance, just setting policy, just talking about themselves in their communications with their legislators, with county OES, with state OES, with whoever it is they need to be talking to make sure that they get involved in those plans, that they have a local plan, and that they think about what do they need to do from an infrastructure standpoint to be included.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm not the expert, but I think the more that communities can start thinking of their facilities as multi-use and how they adapt to emergency scenarios is going to be really crucial. I think engaging with Office of Emergency Service. I mean, I think Cal Fire is going to be kind of your local Cal Fire unit, right? Will be knowledgeable as to the resources available, as will this regional forest and fire capacity program. They're designed to be able to know kind of what tools are out there. But yeah, at the state level, the Strategic Growth Council is doing a lot of the thinking around sort of climate adaptation. Office of Policy and Research from the governor's office is doing a lot of the leadership on that front as well as obviously the Natural Resources Agency. So at the state level, there's a lot of groups working on it, but I think connecting, so you're always welcome to connect at that level, always. But in terms of your community adaptation plans, it's really going to be sort of engaging these kind of devising local strategies and working with your Cal Fire unit and saying, hey, does our Veterans Hall actually work as a survivable space in a wildfire? Is this the right sort of location? Because that's going to depend on like the topography around it and the traffic flow around it, and can people get there? And so I think looking at and part of part of our budget is to put forward some resilience, fire resilience, but they will be skilled at climate resilience as well, planners from the state fire marshal's office into local counties to be able to help establish those plans. And I think presenting facilities and infrastructure that you have as multi-use is really crucial. I think the other buzzword that's really important to think about is natural infrastructure. That's a big term, especially for your water districts to think through, is that we're trying to really invest in natural infrastructure, those whole watershed strategies, because you can see those tangible results. It's a lot cheaper to invest in a watershed that doubles your, and the health of the forest, so that you're actually doubling your water yield than dredging a dam. And and it was amazing to me. I was out with the National Guard crews on one of our strategic fuel breaks, which aren't designed to be sort of huge watershed ecological booms, but you can design them in a way that they have ecological benefits. And they were really excited because there was kind of a little creek running through one of the areas they were working on, just kind of a little drainage that had been dry for decades. Like no one had seen water in it unless it was actively raining. And they had reduced all the invasive species like the manzanita and stuff, and some of the overgrown species on the landscape. It was kind of back down just to the trees and the normal levels. And water had started flowing in that creek because the extra vegetation on the landscape wasn't sucking up and causing evapotranspiration of the water out into the atmosphere. Instead, the water was then getting added to the watershed, and it was percolating in. And so that's kind of the goal when we're talking about natural infrastructure, and how do you design these more sort of collaborative strategies, that whether you're thinking double use for your facility or double use for your landscape, right? It's really about how you can find multiple benefits from one activity and get those dollars to really reverberate down.
That's a great example. I have just two more questions for you, if I can. The first is, you referenced the bonds, right? The and there was the bond proposal previously, as you mentioned. I don't think anybody anticipated a pandemic, so we had that. But I think a lot of people have been talking about infrastructure this year, certainly at the federal level, but also at the state level. I mean, we were talking about it at the state level, I think, before they were actually talking about it at the federal level. There's a number of legislative proposals out there on the topic. Is there anything you can share with us in terms of how you see that coming into shape at the state level, either this year, or I'm guessing probably more likely into 2022, and what we should look out for, or how we can kind of pay attention to that, and maybe how we can contribute to that process?
Yeah, so the governor's not putting forward a governor bond. We're kind of going with a more typical model of the legislature proposes a bond, and the governor looks at it, and takes it into account. So I think the legislature will be leading on that effort, and so it's really up to them. So I would push them on that front. One fun fact for any of you who are budget wonks out there, what we have done, because this $1 billion is quote unquote one-time funding, and the state budget model is more around having kind of is designed to have a surplus, so that we're never sort of going beyond our capacity. The state, as you know, can't issue debt, and so with one-time funding, what we have done, rather than just spending it on sort of discrete acquisition projects like infrastructure or technology, we are spending it on the forest side, which is unusual. And what we're doing is actually having it be multiple years of its lifespan. So for the $1 billion, that the funding that's going to be going before the legislature in June, is actually going to have a longer spending horizon. So typically it's around 2 to 4 years to spend your money. This is going to be 5 to 7 years to spend the funds, which allows then grantees and others to actually hire staff off of it, and to ensure a more steady investment. So rather than having to break up your project into phase 1, 2, and 3, you'll now be able to fund the entire project at once which that means you can hire one contractor for it. You can hire actual crews to come in and do the project start to finish, and you're not going to have the startup and shutdown costs typically. So what we've done is taken sort of one-time funding and created a little bit of a bond structure with it. That's just for anyone who's budget wonky out there and wants to really get into that. That's there's some fun details in this budget. And actually, were you going to ask me about? Do you want to ask about regulations or a permitting process? Because I have some. I think this group is going to be excited on that front.
I was exactly going to ask about that, and then I'll ask the last question.
Okay.
You read my mind. Yes.
Perfect. So thanks for asking about regulations. I wanted to share with all of you that I'm sure if I say CEQA around here, many of you will groan. And so what we've done on the fire resilience side is created a streamlined process for CEQA where we did an environmental impact review across 20 million acres. So essentially a pre-analysis for all of the non-federal fire-prone land in the state. So 20 million acres, which is mostly where our state resources are going to go on fire resilience. And so there's an environmental analysis already done. It's called the CalVTP, which stands for the California Vegetation Treatment Programmatic Environmental Impact Review. Just use the acronym. And the CalVTP is going to be a fast track. It'll let you get your CEQA done in just a couple months, as opposed to a number of years for any fuel reduction or fire related ecological work that you're doing. And what we've also done is California Department of Fish and Wildlife then took that process and they built into it when we were designing it, they built in their mitigations into it so that if you're doing a fuel reduction work, they've sort of put in the design so that you know how to work around certain species. And so that you can't have a footprint that would trigger California Department of Fish and Wildlife permits. So our fuel reduction work is now, you're not going to need additional permits from CDFW when you do this work if you're under the CalVTP. And the water boards are now underway designing a automatic enrollment using the CalVTP. So they also incorporated their mitigations and standards into this process. And so there will be a statewide water board permit so that your CalVTP is now your CEQA equivalent. It will get you CEQA, it will get you Fish and Wildlife, and it will get you water boards permitting requirements. And so that is a huge change, and there won't be additional fees on it. So because we're funding for the water board staff to do this through the budget, and Fish and Wildlife is there sort of doing consulting because they've designed it in a way so that your fuel reduction projects will be effective for fuel reduction and not have a heavy environmental impact on species and wildlife. So it's really, I think it's a good model for us to look towards and to use. I'm very excited because the environmental community helped us design this, as well as like RCRC and other advocates, and just it's a really good collaboration where it's practitioners on the ground who are benefiting from this. The environmental community is supportive of it because it brings in the environmental protections, but it is a fast process. And then the last thing we've actually put in the budget around the CalVTP, because it is a 1,000-page document. And so I don't want any of you guys to go look at it and go, how do I navigate this? And so what we've done is we've included funding for the Board of Forestry to do essentially 40 or so test runs of the CalVTP. So what it requires somebody to go do a project-specific analysis. So you have to do kind of a boots-on-the-ground analysis to get your CalVTP certification, and then you just follow the instructions in the BTP of the species and the ecological equities that you found, and it tells you how to protect them when you're designing your fuel break and fire reduction. And so we're doing 40 project-specific analysis on real projects that that we're funding across different ecologies and landscape types and geographies in the state, so that there will now be templates. Nobody's going to have, if you're in the coastal redwood area, you're going to already have a template for how to do this in the coastal redwood. The mitigations you're going to take will already be identified, and so you don't have to navigate it on your own. And so this is designed to make life easier and more straightforward without diluting the ecology. I mean, nobody wants to do fuel reduction that's going to then 30 years from now say, oh, we wiped out a species, right? Like you want to do it in a way that's going to be ecological. And so now we're making it really easy for people to do that.
I am really glad I thought of that question, Jessica, because our members are going to love those answers. That's going to be very helpful for them. Thank you for that. My last question for you is kind of a fun one. You know, let's pretend that there's a community in California that was fortunate enough to have Jessica Moore selected to the board of their community services district that's in like an urban wildland interface area of the state. You know, what would you sort of coming into the table from a board direction, board policy standpoint say, here's the things that our district needs to be thinking of and doing right now when it comes to climate adaptation and wildfire?
Yeah, so I think many of you would have a better approach than I would. I don't want to sort of supersede the expertise in the room here, but yeah, I mean, I think the framework I laid out, I think, is a really helpful way to think about it. You know, I would start with what do we need to do inside of a community in the worst case scenario a fire comes through. What do we need to do around a community where we can stop a fire from coming in? And what do we need to do on the landscape to restore fire to its ecological norms? And we have tools and resources at each of those levels. But I think taking a science and data-based approach to understanding that is going to be really crucial. So looking at your community and figuring out how many homes are in need of hardening. Just to give you an estimate, the California Fire Safe Council's estimate that 2 million homes in the state are in need of hardening in high fire risk zones. So, you know, taking a look at your neighborhoods and communities, saying how many need hardening, how many need defensible space, who's already got it done, who can afford to do it, right? Let's give them education tools. We have those educational tools available for people through the state fire marshal. And those who don't, that's why we're having this resource available to be able to help homeowners do those retrofits to harden their homes. So you're looking at kind of your fire survivability, right? And then you're looking at where do we place these strategic fuel breaks? So that's you're partnering with your CAL FIRE units are going to be doing all of that analysis for you. And we're getting them LiDAR and better technology to improve some of our predictive models and further refine them so we know where to put those. But, you know, knowing where to put those strategic fuel breaks on the ground, and you're bringing in your fire safe councils and your firewise communities, call the, you know, insurers that are still insuring in your community. Where's one of our goals, try to get everybody insurance back again by reducing the actual risk. Turns out there's a path there. So, you know, making sure that you're sort of bringing these collaboratives on board so that you're placing fuel breaks in a way that is cohesive and effective, and that you've done fuel breaks along your roads as well, because you do not, I mean, they had done a fuel break along Skyway Drive in Paradise right before the fire, the summer before the fire, and that saved lives. I mean, otherwise there would have been flames licking the cars, melting the tires, and they wouldn't have been able to escape. And so really making sure that your roads are fire hardened is really important. And then looking at that whole of landscape, saying, you know, where are our critical watersheds? Where are we having dead fuel on the landscape? How can we get that off? And getting your landscape, whether it's a Southern California chaparral ecosystem or a rolling oak woodland, ensuring that you're putting in treatment tactics that ensure that fire is playing its normal ecological role and isn't going to turn into one of these catastrophic mega fires with a 50,000 foot weather system on a non-windy day, right? I mean, it's really crucial that you have all three resilience fronts built in, and then ask yourselves, how can we do this in a way that is empowering our community? How do we really have that triple bottom line result of improving the ecology, improving the economy, and improving the community with these resources? And we are here to be a support for all of you, and we are here to help you succeed because our goal is for a wildfire resilient state that is not just surviving, but really thriving. And so the resources we have are designed to be able to support. There's a lot of small details, as you've heard me talk about today, that are really impactful. And so we want to help you succeed, and you're going to have the best local knowledge on what's needed on the ground. There is a lot of history and understanding that comes from these special districts and from the local knowledge, which is why you're leading them. And so we want to make sure that that is fully integrated.
Jessica, thank you so much to you, to your colleague, Keali'i. We're grateful for the work that you guys are doing. It's important work. And we're particularly grateful today for your time in coming and speaking with our membership. I know you're going to get some follow-up questions. So I apologize in advance for the deluge of local government people that will be asking you for help, but I know that's exactly what you want. So I take back my apology. We're really grateful, really thankful for the partnership, and we know it's not just going to be this year, but it's for years ahead. This is a long-term effort. So thank you so much. Please thank your team back in the office whenever you're able to safely get back there. And to all of you, thank you for coming and watching this breakout session. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and you all stay safe out there. Bye-bye.